Okay, I'm going to briefly describe Chapter 4 to you. This is a consultation. And what I believe is that the early practitioners of the TDG have to develop a culture of consultation within them in order for this TDG to work well. Otherwise, we will just kind of go back to forming factions and political parties like we had before. So, well, what is consultation? Well, I would say that just about everyone we talk to in every organization that we encounter says, yeah, we believe in consultation. We like listening to other people and adopting other ideas. But the reality is that individuals and organizations are not always consultative. So how is it that we're actually going to define whether an individual or organization is power-based, democratic-based, or consultative-based? And so I've created this paradigm of how I have seen organizations over the years, and hopefully it'll be something useful that can help you identify when are we actually in a consultative mode of thinking. Now, the first thing we look at is we have a particular issue, and how many alternative solutions do we have? Well, in a power-based decision-making model is that there's just one alternative. Okay, so someone's got a very high level of authority and just thinks that they're the ones that got all the solutions, and they make the decisions, and everyone else is basically there to obey them out. In a democratic organization, what you will have is you'll have 2 or 3 different ideas, okay, and each of those alternatives will be championed by someone who really supports that alternative. They will make all their logical pleas and suggestions, and they'll have their eloquent presentations, and they'll be basically trying to sway the votes of those who are really don't have a strong opinion one way or the other which alternative should be suggested. And there may also be some deals being made too to get their idea implemented over their competitors. Okay, so that's a characteristic of a democratic organization. And a consultative organization is that if you're in a consultative mindset, is that you are willing to explore many alternatives. Okay, and it's just anyone can introduce an alternative. It's not just the person with power. It's just not the ones with the ways of those who are very skillful at democratic means of presenting their alternatives. Basically, anyone can introduce an alternative, and it will be freely discussed in a consultative mindset. The next characteristic to analyze to determine whether we're in a power, democratic, or consultative mindset is the freedom of speech. And in a power-based model is that speech is suppressed or very guarded. Okay, and for those of you that have experienced being on the wrong side of a politically correct argument, is that that person is trying to shut you up. And that's basically, they think they've got more power than you, and they've got the ways of embarrassing you, and they're gonna try and get you to stop thinking the way you're thinking, or at least not present it out in public. Okay, so speech is very, very suppressed. In a democratic model is that you do have this thing called free speech. Okay, but there is no obligation to listen. Okay, so you're not scared that there's going to be repercussions if you do express your opinion, and the people that are willing to give you their time and their energy to use you explain it, but no one's obligated to listen. People's minds are generally made up, and there's nothing's going to sway them from their position. And in a consultative thing is that listening is required. And the reason it is required is that despite whatever knowledge, wisdom, and experience that we have had in our lives, we can always learn something from somebody else. And so if a person has a differing perspective or opinion on something than I have, then it's incumbent on me to ask that person, says, well, why are you thinking that way? Is there something that I'm not seeing at this point that we need to incorporate into our decision-making process? And so a consultative is that we're listening, and it's because it's necessary to listen for, to see what other people are thinking and what they're doing. And so that's one way, is that how is speech handled in the 3 characteristics of this paradigm. Our next characteristic to differentiate between a power, democratic, and consultative decision-making process is what happens when a bad decision is made. Well, if we are in a power-based model of decision-making, there's no accountability. The powerful person made the decision that turned out to be bad, and if anybody says anything about that, there's going to be repercussions. So that's it. There's no accountability. In a democratic one is that there's lots of accountability. So if someone or some group makes a bad decision in a democratic process, the opponents of that individual or opponents of that group are going to try and see if they can get those people fired from the next election. So there's going to be a lot of attacking and saying, you guys don't know what you're doing. And so therefore, when the next election comes around, hopefully the people will be smart enough to vote for us instead of them, because they make all sorts of bad decisions. When a bad decision is made in a consultative environment, okay, it's regarded as a learning experience. And so that's, we says, yeah, we tried something, we did it as best as we knew how it was going to work, and it didn't turn out very well. Okay, let's move on to some other kind of different solution, but let's learn from what we learned last time and see if we can make this next decision better. So that's as consultative, is that a bad decision turns into a learning experience. Okay, the last characteristic I'm going to talk about now is the client satisfaction of the three different models of decision-making processes, okay? And that is with the, how is the satisfaction of the clients? And by clients, I mean that the people that are kind of at the bottom of the decision-making process. Okay, so when we're in a power-based model, there's not much client satisfaction. Okay, the people at the bottom, they weren't consulted on their opinions and perspectives. Someone with a lot of power made the decisions, and they just had to go along with it. And maybe it was a good decision, maybe it was not. But the people are just not saying, yeah, they didn't care about us at all. They're not satisfied. For a democratic one is if you ask for the client satisfaction, and I would say that the skillful players are satisfied. For those that are really good at working the democratic processes, like the Robert's Rules of Orders and knowing how to make alliances and make deals and all that kind of stuff, the skillful players are saying that the system works quite well. But again, the people underneath those skillful players, the ones that don't have the skills, they're probably saying, you know what, it's not really that much different than a power model. Okay. And finally is that we've got the consultative ones, and this is where we're going to have much more satisfaction. Okay, because they can start, talking about amongst their neighbors and put their concerns up to the neighborhood representative, and if there's some kind of social or political will to move an issue further, that neighborhood representative can move it up the layers. And not only that, is that if the citizens themselves believe that all their elected representatives are working with a consultative mindset, they tend to believe that they're probably making some pretty good decisions. And so they are actually more satisfied with a consultative mindset. Now, when I use this paradigm and apply it to various decision-making bodies I have been involved with there, I have found out that very, very seldom do we have a truly 100% power decision-making process, or do we have a 100% democratic decision-making process, or do we have a 100% consultative decision-making process? And in fact, all decisions are actually a combination of those three processes. And so they're all kind of playing against each other a little bit. And so I have been involved on something that's very close to a power relationship, where there's been an authority figure, and that figure really doesn't tolerate any kind of dissent or any kind of perspectives. But at the same token is that that authority figure has allowed other people to express their opinions from time to time, and he or she not listen to it or take advice, but there's always opinions that are there's opinions that can be expressed. Or sometimes, especially when you're working with a political party and you got different factions going together, so you're looking inside mostly a democratic decision-making process. And I have also been involved in various situations that's mostly a consultative, but there's always a little bit of power happening, a little bit of democracy happening as well in these decisions. And so I don't think that we have a situation where we got 100% of one and 0% of the others. There's always a combination of these things. But the idea here is that regardless of where we are, it should be our goal is to move our decision-making paradigm, either as individuals, as group, closer to the consultative mindset. And even if you've got lots of consultation, how can we make it better? And it's incumbent on the early TDG builders to really develop that consultation, to really take a look and say how, especially after their meetings, is to say, how did I help the consultation? Was I listening to people? Was I listening to what they were saying? And how was I combining that, my knowledge, wisdom, experience with the knowledge and wisdom and experience of the other people at the table? And it's really important to really start moving this whole thing closer to consultation, move it closer to consultation. And that is going to be a necessary step for the TDG to work properly.